social media's devastating impact on their children. There was no better place to share this.
1 minute ago, Kensington Palace dropped a bombshell that nobody saw coming. Prince William just made a shocking announcement about Meghan, and it's far worse than anyone imagined. The statement was ice cold, brutally final, and left no room for hope. Royal insiders are calling it the most devastating decision in decades. What really happened behind those palace walls? What pushed William to this breaking point? And why now?
As you'll likely hear many times this week, look, as we just heard, you'll hear all sorts of things. Some very heavy, some very uplifting.
The statement itself was brief, but every word seemed carefully chosen to convey a clear message. According to reports from palace sources, the wording had gone through several revisions before being approved for release. What emerged was a statement that many described as clinical in its precision. There were no softening phrases, no hints at future reconciliation, and no ambiguity about where things stood. Within the first hour of the announcement going public, morning television programmes across Britain interrupted their regular scheduling. Presenters on BBC Breakfast, Good Morning Britain, and Sky News all turned their attention to the breaking story. The ticker at the bottom of screens scrolled the same message repeatedly, and phone lines lit up with viewers calling in to share their reactions. Some expressed shock, others said they had seen it coming, but nearly everyone agreed that something significant had shifted within the royal family. The reaction was not confined to the United Kingdom. In the United States, where it was still the middle of the night when the announcement dropped, major networks began covering the story as soon as their morning shows went live. CNN, MSNBC, and the major broadcast networks all led with the palace statement. American audiences, who had followed the ongoing tensions between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family for years, seemed particularly invested in understanding what this development meant. Social media erupted almost immediately. Within 2 hours, related hashtags were trending worldwide. Twitter, now known as X, saw thousands of posts per minute discussing the announcement. Some users defended William's decision, arguing that he was protecting his family and the institution of the monarchy. Others criticized what they saw as a harsh and unnecessary public statement. The divide in opinion roughly mirrored the geographic split, with British users generally more supportive and American users more divided. Royal commentators and historians were quickly pulled into television studios and radio programs to provide context. Several noted that this type of definitive statement from a senior royal about another family member was extremely rare in modern times. One veteran royal correspondent mentioned that she could not recall another instance in recent decades where such a clear boundary had been drawn so publicly. The comparison many reached for was the period surrounding Princess Diana, though the circumstances and tone were quite different. What became clear as the day progressed was that this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. Multiple sources with knowledge of palace operations suggested that this announcement represented the culmination of weeks, if not months, of internal discussions and deliberations. The fact that it was released on a Saturday morning, when news cycles are typically quieter, indicated careful strategic planning. Palace communications teams generally prefer to release sensitive information when they can better control the narrative. Behind the scenes, according to individuals familiar with palace dynamics, Prince William had been under considerable pressure from multiple directions. His father, King Charles, was reportedly dealing with health concerns that had not been fully disclosed to the public. This meant additional responsibilities were falling on William's shoulders at a time when the family was already navigating complex internal tensions. The combination of increased duty and ongoing family friction created a situation that many close to the situation described as unsustainable. Two other key figures played important roles in the events leading up to the announcement. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duties and her fierce protection of the monarchy as an institution, had reportedly been advocating for a clearer position on the ongoing Sussex situation. Her view, according to those familiar with her thinking, was that the constant media speculation and conflicting narratives were damaging to the Crown's credibility and effectiveness. Perhaps more surprisingly, Queen Camilla had also become increasingly concerned about the situation. Camilla, who had her own difficult history with public perception and media scrutiny, understood better than most how damaging prolonged negative coverage could be. Sources suggest she was particularly worried about how the ongoing tensions were affecting King Charles during a period when his health required less stress, not more. Her alignment with William on the need for decisive action was significant because she typically prefers to stay out of family disputes. The substance of what had been happening behind palace walls remained somewhat unclear to the public, but certain patterns had emerged in the weeks leading up to the announcement. Media outlets, particularly in the United States, had been running stories that seemed to originate from similar sources. These stories often portrayed Meghan in a sympathetic light, while raising questions about how other members of the royal family, particularly Catherine, Princess of Wales, were managing their responsibilities. Several British newspapers had noted what they described as a coordinated media strategy that appeared designed to rehabilitate Meghan's public image while subtly undermining others in the royal family. Whether this was intentional or simply how different media outlets were choosing to frame their coverage remained a matter of debate. However, the perception within palace circles was that a pattern had developed that needed to be addressed. The timing of William's announcement also raised questions. November had been a particularly tense month within royal circles, with multiple reports of strained communications and cancelled or postponed events. The decision to make a public statement just as December began suggested that William wanted to draw a line before the Christmas period, traditionally the most important time of year for the royal family's public image. As the day wore on and more analysis emerged, it became clear that this was not just another chapter in the ongoing saga of royal family tensions. This was something more definitive. The careful wording, the strategic timing, and the absolute nature of the language all pointed to a decision that had been made with full awareness of its consequences. Whatever bridge might have existed between William and Meghan appeared to have been not just damaged but deliberately and permanently closed. To understand how the situation reached such a critical point by the end of November, it's necessary to look back at the weeks and months that preceded the announcement. The collapse of relations between Prince William and Meghan Markle did not happen overnight. Rather, it was the result of a slow accumulation of incidents, concerns, and pressures that eventually became impossible to ignore. Throughout the early part of November, King Charles had been facing health challenges that were only partially disclosed to the public. Palace officials released minimal information, citing the need for privacy and the king's desire to continue his duties without unnecessary speculation. However, behind the scenes, those close to the royal household noticed that Charles's schedule was being quietly adjusted. Events were being consolidated, and the gaps between public appearances were growing longer. This placed additional pressure on Prince William, who was already managing his own royal responsibilities while trying to maintain some semblance of normal family life with Catherine and their 3 children. At first, William appeared to believe that the tensions within the family were temporary. Royal families have weathered storms before, and there was a hope that time and distance might allow emotions to settle. The winter months have traditionally been a quieter period for the royals, with fewer public engagements and more time for private reflection. William seemed to be counting on this natural rhythm to help ease the situation. Unfortunately, this time proved to be different. During this period, a pattern began emerging in media coverage, particularly in American outlets. Stories about Meghan began appearing with increasing frequency, often framed around themes of redemption and reinvention. These pieces typically portrayed her as someone who had tried to modernize the monarchy but had been held back by outdated institutions and resistant family members. The narratives were compelling and well-crafted, and they found receptive audiences, especially among younger Americans who viewed the royal family through a more critical lens. British media outlets noticed this trend and began reporting on it with growing frustration. Many British commentators felt that the constant focus on Sussex-related drama was overshadowing the actual work being done by working members of the royal family. Every time William, Catherine, or other royals undertook important charitable work or state responsibilities, the coverage seemed to be drowned out by yet another story about Meghan's experiences or future plans. This created tension not just within the family, but also among media professionals who felt they were being manipulated by competing narratives. Inside Kensington Palace, William's team began receiving briefings that highlighted a troubling pattern. Multiple sources were feeding information to American talk shows and digital media platforms, and these sources all seemed to be working from similar talking points. The stories were often exaggerated, sometimes factually incorrect, but always strategically timed to coincide with major royal events. When William was scheduled to give an important speech, a story about Meghan would break the same day. When Catherine launched a new initiative, questions about the Sussex situation would dominate the press coverage. This was not just annoying from a public relations standpoint, it represented something more serious. The carefully orchestrated nature of these media interventions suggested that someone was actively working to control the narrative in ways that benefited one party while undermining others. For William, who takes his role as future king extremely seriously, this kind of ongoing disruption posed a real threat to the monarchy's ability to function effectively. The situation became even more complicated when the Foreign Office quietly reached out to palace officials. The message was delivered discreetly, as these things always are in diplomatic circles, but its meaning was unmistakable. The ongoing public drama surrounding the Sussex situation was beginning to complicate Britain's relationships with international partners. Diplomats were finding themselves fielding questions about royal family tensions when they should have been discussing trade agreements or security cooperation. A senior minister reportedly sent a private note to the palace, emphasizing the need for what was described as internal consolidation of messaging. The diplomatic language could not hide the basic message: the government needed the royal family to get its house in order. Throughout all of this, two people were watching the situation develop with particular concern. Princess Anne, who has spent her entire life in service to the crown and has often been described as the hardest working royal, saw the chaos as fundamentally incompatible with the discipline and duty she believes the monarchy requires. Anne has never been one to tolerate what she perceives as attention-seeking or disrespect for royal protocols. Her view of the Sussex situation was reportedly quite clear. The ongoing drama was damaging the institution and needed to be addressed decisively. Queen Camilla's perspective was different, but led to the same conclusion. Camilla understood from personal experience how damaging sustained negative media coverage could be. She had lived through years of being vilified by the press, and she knew how that kind of pressure could affect not just the person at the center of the storm, but everyone around them. Her primary concern was King Charles. She could see that the ongoing family tensions were taking a toll on him, and she worried that prolonged stress could impact his health. For Camilla, the issue was not about protocol or tradition, it was about protecting someone she loved during a vulnerable period. By the final week of November, the tension had reached a level where it could no longer be managed through quiet diplomacy or strategic silence. Palace staff could feel it in the way meetings were conducted and decisions were made. The normally calm atmosphere of Kensington Palace had taken on an edge. Even Catherine, who is known for her composure and ability to rise above controversy, seemed affected by the mounting pressure. Those close to her reported that she was particularly troubled by media stories that seemed designed to call her competence and character into question. William found himself in an increasingly difficult position. As someone who values privacy and believes strongly in handling family matters privately, he was instinctively resistant to making any kind of public statement. However, he was also acutely aware that his silence was being interpreted in various ways, none of them helpful. Some saw it as weakness, others as complicity, and still others as evidence of deeper rifts than anyone was willing to admit. The longer he remained silent, the more the speculation grew. The breaking point came with the discovery of what palace insiders began calling the winter briefing document. This was not something that appeared in public or was leaked to the press. Rather, it was a confidential document that somehow made its way into the hands of a palace staff member. The document outlined a proposed media campaign that was apparently being planned for release during the Christmas period. The campaign was designed to reframe the narrative around Meghan's time in the royal family, positioning her as a progressive figure whose attempts at modernization had been blocked by institutional resistance. What troubled William most about this document was not just its content, but its timing. Christmas is the most symbolically important season for the British royal family. It is when they come together publicly, when they attend church services that the nation watches, and when they present an image of unity and tradition that many Britons find comforting. To launch a media campaign during this period that would inevitably generate controversy and dominate news coverage struck William as more than just poor judgment. It felt like a deliberate attempt to undermine the very thing he was working to protect. Princess Anne reviewed the same document and came to an even more serious conclusion. Buried in the proposed campaign materials were subtle but unmistakable references to Catherine. The language suggested mismanagement of charitable initiatives and raised questions about how effectively the Princess of Wales was performing her duties. For Anne, who has enormous respect for Catherine and the dignified way she has approached her role, this crossed a line. It was one thing to try to rehabilitate Meghan's image. It was quite another to do so by attacking someone who had quietly and effectively served the monarchy for years. When Anne and William discussed the situation privately, walking through the cold corridors of Windsor Castle, the conversation was brief but decisive. Anne laid out the implications clearly. If this media campaign launched as planned, the monarchy would be forced into another exhausting cycle of responding to accusations and defending itself against coordinated attacks. Catherine's reputation, built carefully over more than a decade of public service, would become collateral damage. The Christmas period, which should be about unity and tradition, would instead be dominated by conflict and controversy. William listened without interrupting, his expression controlled, but his tension visible to anyone who knew him well. When Anne finished speaking, he asked a simple question. Who else knows about this? The answer was significant. Queen Camilla had also seen the document and had reached the same conclusion about its potential impact. For Camilla to be alarmed enough to speak up represented a major shift. She had always tried to stay out of Sussex-related matters, preferring to focus on supporting Charles and her own charitable work. Her willingness to align herself publicly with William's concerns signaled that the situation had become too serious to ignore. That evening, Camilla approached William privately and delivered a message that would prove crucial. She told him that his father could not endure another season of public turmoil like the ones they had experienced before. The stress, the constant media speculation, the family divisions playing out in public view, all of it was taking a toll that Charles could not afford to pay. It was the first time Camilla had openly urged William to take decisive action regarding Meghan, and her words carried weight precisely because she had been so reluctant to involve herself before. The final piece came from the Foreign Office's encrypted message warning that the escalating media narratives were beginning to complicate diplomatic communications. When government officials start expressing concern about how royal family drama is affecting international relations, the situation has moved beyond the personal and into the realm of national interest. By this point, William understood that he no longer had the luxury of hoping the situation would resolve itself. A decision had to be made, and he was the only one who could make it. The tension that had been building throughout November finally came to a head inside one of Buckingham Palace's most historically significant rooms. The space has witnessed countless important moments in British history. It has hosted negotiations with world leaders, difficult conversations about national crises, and delicate family discussions. On this particular late November evening, it would witness a confrontation that would reshape the royal family's future. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the tall windows with enough force to make the old frames rattle slightly. Inside, the atmosphere felt even colder despite the heating. Prince William sat at the head of a long table that had been in the palace for generations. In front of him lay a stack of documents that his staff had carefully prepared. These included printouts from the Royal Communications Monitoring Unit, transcripts from American talk shows, analysis of anonymous media sources, and most importantly, the winter briefing document that outlined the proposed Christmas media campaign. To William's left sat Princess Anne, her arms crossed and her expression set in that particular look of determination that those who know her have learned to recognize. On his right was Queen Camilla, her hands clasped on the table in front of her, her face showing a firmness that surprised even some of the senior advisors present. When the private secretary closed the heavy doors, sealing them off from the rest of the palace, everyone in the room understood that what was about to be discussed would not leave these walls unless they decided it should. William spoke first, and his opening words set the tone for everything that followed. He made it clear that the discussion was not about personal grievances or family disputes. This was about the stability of the crown itself, about the monarchy's ability to function effectively in an increasingly complex world. There was no disagreement from anyone present. They all understood that the situation had moved far beyond hurt feelings or damaged relationships. Princess Anne was the next to speak. She pushed forward her annotated copy of the winter briefing document and began explaining what she saw as its most troubling elements. The document represented, in her view, a deliberate and orchestrated attempt to launch a narrative that would undermine the work being done by active members of the royal family. More specifically, she pointed out sections that seemed designed to call Catherine's competence into question. Anne's voice was sharp and controlled as she spoke, but those present could hear the anger beneath her measured words. Camilla spoke next, her tone lower but equally certain. She reminded everyone in the room that King Charles was not in a position to handle another extended period of public controversy. She did not go into specific details about his health, that would have been inappropriate, but her meaning was perfectly clear. The king had barely recovered from the last major cycle of Sussex-related media turmoil. If another wave hit during the Christmas season, the consequences could be serious. William reviewed the papers in front of him again, not because he needed to refresh his memory, but because he needed a moment to process what he was hearing. He had known for weeks that the situation was deteriorating, but hearing Anne and Camilla speak with such complete alignment, two women who normally approach problems from very different angles, gave him a clarity he had not quite achieved on his own. The private secretary then began presenting the findings from the communications monitoring team. The room fell into a heavy silence as he read through the evidence they had gathered. Multiple American media outlets had received identical talking points from 3 separate social media accounts, and these accounts were linked to a public relations agency that had previous connections to Meghan's team. The secretary was careful not to make accusations, but the pattern he described was clear enough. He continued with what palace staff found even more concerning. There were indirect attacks being made against Catherine across various platforms. These ranged from suggestions of internal conflict, to hints about emotional instability, to questions about how charitable initiatives were being managed. None of these claims had any basis in fact, but they were being repeated often enough that they were starting to gain traction in certain circles. The most unsettling information came at the end of the briefing. The communications team had done projections based on the planned media campaign. If it launched as scheduled, it would likely dominate public conversation throughout the entire Christmas period. This meant that every royal engagement, every church service, every traditional event that the public looks forward to would be overshadowed by controversy. The projected outcome was described in one particularly stark phrase: destabilizing public confidence. The discussion then moved to the international complications that were already beginning to form. Foreign Office representatives had been receiving questions from diplomatic partners about whether the British Crown intended to address what was being described as Sussex-related instability. For Britain's allies to be asking these questions represented a level of concern that extended well beyond tabloid gossip. Princess Anne leaned forward at this point and spoke directly to William. Her words were blunt and left no room for ambiguity. She told him that he knew what needed to be done. If Meghan was preparing a media campaign that targeted his wife, threatened the monarchy's stability, and potentially endangered his father's health, he could not allow it to proceed unchallenged. Then Camilla said something that no one in the room expected. She told William that he carried the future of the family on his shoulders, and if he needed to establish a firm boundary, he should do so. She said that Charles would understand, even if it caused him pain. This was remarkable coming from Camilla, who had spent years carefully avoiding any appearance of interfering in family dynamics. The room fell completely silent. William finally raised his eyes from the papers and looked at each person present. When he spoke, his words were measured and final. He said he would act, but the decision had to be complete and unambiguous. There could be no half measures and no room for misinterpretation. Palace staff immediately began drafting potential statements. They worked through multiple versions, testing different languages to find the right balance between firmness and dignity. William rejected several drafts. Some were too harsh and would make him appear vindictive. Others were too vague and would simply generate more speculation. He wanted absolute clarity. By late that evening, the final statement was nearly complete. The plan was straightforward. At precisely 6:47 in the morning on November the 30th, Kensington Palace would release a message confirming William's position regarding Meghan. The timing was chosen deliberately to catch the morning news cycles in Britain, while it would still be night in America. As the staff began to disperse, William remained alone in the dimly lit room. He knew that in a few hours, every newspaper would be analysing his words, but he also knew that he had no other choice. The morning of November the 30th arrived with brittle stillness. Inside his private study, Prince William stood alone holding the final draft. The decision had been made, but its full weight settled on him in this quiet moment before dawn. Just after 6:30, Princess Anne arrived. She did not ask if he was certain. A single look told her everything. She placed her hand on his arm briefly and said simply, "It's time." At 6:42, Queen Camilla entered, wanting William to know she stood with him. At exactly 6:47, the message went live. In the hours following the 6:47 announcement, the monarchy entered a state of controlled recalibration. The statement had been crisp, final, and carefully worded, but the ripples it created extended far beyond what many had anticipated. Inside Kensington Palace, senior staff moved quickly to manage the immediate aftermath. A priority meeting began at 8:15 in the morning, with advisors from communications, legal, and protocol departments reviewing the implications of what had just been released to the world. Their task was multifaceted and demanding. They needed to reinforce stability within the institution, adjust internal records to reflect the new reality update briefing materials for foreign partners who would inevitably have questions, and prepare a consistent narrative for the days and weeks ahead. No one in the room expressed surprise at what William had done. They had all seen the tension rising throughout November, and now that a clear boundary had been established, there was a sense of reluctant relief among the staff. One advisor was overheard saying quietly that at least everyone now knew where things stood, and that clarity, however painful, was better than the uncertainty that had dominated recent months. The biggest shift in approach came from the Foreign Office. By mid-morning, diplomats across various British embassies and consulates had been briefed on how to handle international inquiries regarding Meghan and the Sussex situation. They were provided with a standardized response that was both simple and definitive. The matter is closed. This single sentence was designed to halt speculation before it could develop into prolonged diplomatic conversations. The UK government, acutely aware of the delicate nature of transatlantic relationships, particularly with the United States, appreciated the clarity more than the general public would ever realise. Uncertainty in royal affairs has a way of complicating diplomatic work, and having a clear position made everyone's job considerably easier. Princess Anne, meanwhile, resumed her scheduled engagements with what observers described as renewed energy. Those who saw her that day noted a firmness in her posture and a steadiness in her gaze that suggested she felt vindicated in the position she had taken. Anne has spent decades advocating for discipline and duty within the royal family, and she had endured quiet criticism from some quarters for what they perceived as an inflexible approach to the Sussex situation. Now, with William's announcement making clear that boundaries were necessary, Anne's earlier warnings seemed prescient rather than harsh. She did not gloat or make public statements about being proven right. That would have been entirely out of character, but those close to her could sense a shift in how she carried herself. Queen Camilla spent much of the afternoon in private reflection. The winter light filtered through the windows of her sitting room in thin, cold bands, casting long shadows across the furniture. She had chosen to support William's decision primarily out of concern for Charles, but the emotional toll of the situation lingered. Camilla understands better than most people how media campaigns can destroy reputations and damage families. She had lived through years of negative coverage herself, and while she had eventually emerged from that period with her dignity intact, the scars remained. Seeing similar patterns emerge around Meghan and the royal family had triggered memories and concerns that went beyond simple protocol or institutional protection. For Camilla, this was personal in ways that few people, outside the immediate family, could fully appreciate. As for King Charles, he attended a short briefing at Clarence House before returning to his private study to process what had happened. Staff members who saw him that day reported that he looked drained but composed. He was absorbing the consequences of a decision he had quietly authorised but had hoped would never become necessary. Charles has always been a father first, even while being a king, and the permanent severing of ties between his son and daughter-in-law represented a kind of family fracture he had desperately wanted to avoid. His hope throughout the entire Sussex saga had been that time and patience might eventually heal the wounds. But leadership, particularly royal leadership, rarely allows for the comfort of waiting indefinitely. Sometimes decisions must be made that prioritize institutional stability over personal preference, and Charles understood this reality, even as it pained him. The public reaction to William's announcement split sharply along geographic and generational lines. In the United Kingdom, particularly among viewers over 50, the statement was seen as overdue. Radio call-in shows were flooded with listeners expressing support for William's decision. Many callers argued that the monarchy had been too patient and too accommodating for too long. They felt that the constant drama and media speculation had overshadowed the serious work being done by working members of the royal family. There was a sense among this demographic that stability and tradition needed to take precedence over modern notions of family reconciliation at any cost. In the United States, however, the narrative fractured in more complex ways. Morning talk shows devoted extensive coverage to the announcement, with panels debating William's decision from multiple angles. Some American commentators praised what they described as William's courage in setting clear boundaries and protecting his immediate family from ongoing turmoil. Others questioned whether the monarchy was closing the door on reconciliation prematurely and whether a more gradual approach might have been possible. The generational divide was particularly pronounced in American coverage, with younger commentators more likely to express sympathy for Meghan and older commentators more likely to support William's position. Despite these divisions, one theme emerged consistently across nearly all coverage, both British and American. Catherine's dignity and steadiness throughout the entire Sussex saga had not gone unnoticed. Many commentators pointed out that while drama swirled around her, Catherine had continued to fulfill her duties with grace and professionalism. She had not engaged in public disputes, had not leaked information to friendly media outlets, and had not allowed herself to be drawn into the kind of tit-for-tat exchanges that dominate so much modern celebrity culture. This restraint had earned her considerable respect, even from people who might otherwise be critical of the monarchy as an institution. By nightfall on November the 30th, the royal family had shifted into a new configuration. The change was not dramatic in the sense of people changing roles or responsibilities, but rather in the clarity of relationships and expectations. The announcement had not simply ended speculation about whether reconciliation with Meghan might be possible. It had fundamentally redrawn the boundaries of who was considered part of the working royal family and who was definitively outside that circle. This kind of clear delineation had been absent for years, and its establishment, while painful, brought a sense of structural stability that had been missing. In the days that followed, palace operations continued with a noticeably different atmosphere. Staff members reported feeling as though a weight had been lifted, not because anyone took pleasure in family discord, but because the uncertainty that had plagued their work for so long had been replaced with clarity. When planning events or preparing briefings, they no longer had to consider whether Sussex-related complications might arise. The boundaries were clear, and that clarity made their jobs considerably easier. International diplomatic partners also adjusted their approach. Ambassadors and foreign ministers who had previously tiptoed around questions about royal family dynamics now received straightforward guidance from the Foreign Office. The consistency of messaging helped restore confidence in Britain's ability to manage its own internal affairs, which in turn helped smooth over some of the diplomatic complications that had emerged in recent months. Several diplomatic sources, speaking on background to journalists, expressed relief that the situation had been resolved definitively rather than being allowed to continue indefinitely. For the British public, the announcement marked a turning point in how they thought about the monarchy's future. Opinion polls conducted in the weeks following William's statement showed increasing support for his leadership style. Many respondents indicated that they appreciated his willingness to make difficult decisions and to prioritize institutional stability over personal relationships. This was particularly true among older Britons, who tend to be the monarchy's strongest supporters and who had grown increasingly frustrated with what they perceived as endless Sussex drama overshadowing traditional royal duties. The announcement also had implications for how the monarchy approached its modernisation efforts. For years, there had been ongoing debates within royal circles about how to balance tradition with the need to remain relevant to younger generations. The Sussex situation had become entangled with these debates, with some arguing that the monarchy needed to be more flexible and accommodating, while others insisted that core principles of duty and service could not be compromised. William's decision signalled clearly which side of that debate he fell on. Modernisation would continue, but not at the expense of institutional coherence or family stability. As December began and the initial shock of the announcement faded into ongoing analysis and commentary, one reality became increasingly clear. The monarchy had chosen stability over continued attempts at reconciliation. It had chosen to protect working members of the royal family over accommodating those who had stepped back from royal duties. and it had chosen to establish clear boundaries rather than allowing ambiguity to persist indefinitely. These choices would shape the institution for years to come, defining not just William's approach to leadership, but the monarchy's relationship with public expectations and media narratives. The winter sun set early over London on those first days of December, casting long shadows across the palace grounds. Inside, life continued with a new sense of purpose and direction. The announcement had not solved every problem the royal family faced, but it had resolved the single most persistent source of tension and uncertainty. For William, who would one day be king, it represented a defining moment in his evolution as a leader. He had made a choice that was painful but necessary, and in doing so, he had demonstrated the kind of resolve that monarchy requires in difficult times.